The invitation arrived at Bellamy's silk warehouse on a Tuesday, delivered by a footman in Cavendish livery who plainly expected to be kept waiting in the street and was startled to be shown straight through the counting room to the proprietor's own desk. Imogen Vane. No, the narrator corrects herself before beginning, because the name on the card was not the name on the ledger, and the difference between the two is the whole of this story. The card said, "His Grace the Duke of Cavendish requests the pleasure of the company of Miss Eleanor Bray at a ball to be given at Cavendish House, the 9th of June at 10 o'clock. The ledger, the one under the desk's false bottom, said Bray and Company, purveyors of silk and fine mercery to Her Majesty's household, capital £71,000, and the woman reading the card by the window was the sole proprietor of it. Eleanor Bray was 28. 4 years earlier she had been Miss Bray of Hertford, the vicar's daughter, engaged to Julian Ashworth, then Marquess of Renfrew, now Duke of Cavendish, since his father's death, engaged for 11 months, walked out on a fortnight before the wedding. In a letter of 4 lines that said the connection did not, upon reflection, suit his family's interest, and enclosed a banker's draft for £200, by way of what he called settling the matter honourably. She had torn the draft in half in front of the messenger and kept the pieces. They were in the same drawer as the invitation now. What Julian Ashworth did not know, what almost nobody in London knew, because she had spent 4 years making certain of it, was that Miss Eleanor Bray of Hertford and E. Bray of Bray and Company were the same woman, and that the silk merchant supplying half the great houses of Mayfair, including, as it happened, Cavendish House itself, had built her fortune on the £200 she never cashed and the humiliation she never forgot. She read the invitation twice. Then she began, very calmly, to plan what she would wear. The narrator will explain the invitation, because it requires explaining, and because understanding the cruelty of it is the whole engine of what follows. Julian Ashworth, Duke of Cavendish, was 34, and he had spent 4 years believing he had done a frightened, penniless girl an unkind but necessary service, and had heard, in the spring of this year, a rumour repeated at his club that Miss Bray of Hertford had come to some sort of trade success in London, and was, absurdly, received in a few good houses on the strength of her custom rather than her birth. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had heard the same rumour with considerably more alarm, because the Dowager Duchess had never forgiven the Brays for existing at all, and had spent 4 years terrified that her son's broken engagement might one day be spoken of as anything other than his own excellent judgment. Between them, mother and son constructed a small, precise cruelty. They would invite her. She would arrive, as such women always arrived at such houses, they assumed, overawed, underdressed, transparently delighted to be noticed by her betters, and the whole of society would watch a duke be gracious to a woman he had once, wisely, declined to marry. It would settle the rumour permanently. It would cost nothing. She will be grateful for the invitation, the Dowager Duchess said, and grateful people are easily managed. Julian, if he examined his own motives honestly, which he rarely did, wanted something else as well, wanted, in some buried and unexamined corner of himself, to see her again and confirm that he had been right to go. He got, instead, the 9th of June. Eleanor Bray arrived at Cavendish House at 10:30, 3/4 of an hour after the crush had properly begun, in a gown of her own house's silk, a deep bronze gold shot through with copper thread, cut with a severity that made every other woman in the room look overdressed by comparison, and she arrived on the arm of Sir Godfrey Aldous, whose wife's trousseau Bray and Company had supplied for 11 years, and who greeted her at the door with the particular warmth of a man who has never once been kept waiting for an invoice. She was announced. Nobody in that room gasped, because nobody there had the faintest notion they were meant to. What happened instead was this. The Countess of Marbury, who owed her presentation gown to Eleanor's house and her friendship, entirely genuine, to 11 years of Tuesday afternoon fittings, crossed the room within a minute of the announcement and kissed her on both cheeks. Lady Featherstone, whose daughter's wedding clothes Eleanor had personally overseen the spring before, called out her name across 2 sets of dancers. A cluster of merchants' wives, whose husbands' credit Eleanor had quietly and discreetly extended through the hard winter of 2 years past, without ever once mentioning it, formed around her within 10 minutes like a small, warm court. Julian Ashworth, receiving guests at the head of the stairs, watched a woman he had prepared to patronize walk into his ballroom and require no patronage whatsoever. She did not look for him. That was the detail that undid him first, not that she cut him, which would at least have been a response, but that finding him seemed to occupy no part of her attention at all. She was fully, entirely occupied with a room that already knew and liked her. The Dowager Duchess found her son at the edge of the floor 40 minutes later, his jaw set in a way she recognized from his boyhood. "She has not come to us," the Dowager said low. "She was to come to us. She has come to everyone else." Julian, his mother's fingers closed on his sleeve. "Half this room is wearing her silk." "I did not know that." "Did you know that?" He had not known it. He was beginning, with a cold, dropping sensation entirely new to him, to understand how much he had not known. He crossed to her himself a little after midnight, during a lull between sets, because not crossing to her had become, in front of 200 people, its own kind of statement, and one he could not afford his mother to make on his behalf a second time. "Miss Bray," he bowed over her hand with the correct degree of formality. "You are very welcome. Your Grace." She inclined her head exactly the correct degree in return, no more, no less, the precise courtesy owed a host by a guest, and nothing whatsoever beyond it. "What a very fine room. You have been much sought after this evening." "Have I?" She said it without any particular emphasis, glancing past his shoulder at Lady Featherstone, who was signaling something about a fitting on Thursday. I confess I had not counted. It was, of every sentence spoken to him in 10 years, the one that lodged deepest, because he understood, with the specific, unwelcome clarity of a man encountering the truth about himself for the first time in a crowded room, that she had not come tonight to best him. Bettering him had not required an invitation. She had simply arrived and lived her actual life in front of him, and his own plan had collapsed entirely on contact with the fact that she no longer required anything from him at all. "I understand you keep a warehouse," he said, because he did not know what else to say, and heard, as he said it, exactly how it sounded. "I own a house of business, Your Grace, employing 41 persons, with a royal warrant applied for and, I am told on good authority, likely to be granted before Michaelmas." Her voice remained perfectly pleasant. "Bray and Company. You will find our account current among your own households, I believe, though I imagine you have never looked at it." He had never looked at it. He had never looked at any of his household accounts. His steward managed them. The way stewards managed everything a gentleman was too occupied to examine, and it had never once occurred to him, standing in his own ballroom, how much of his life he had spent not looking. "Miss Bray, I wonder if I might. I am promised for this next, Your Grace." She was already turning, already smiling at someone beyond him. An actual, unguarded smile, the first he had seen on her face all evening, and it was not for him, and had never once, in 4 hours, been for him. "You must not let me keep you from your other guests." The Dowager Duchess struck first, and struck at the one place she believed a tradeswoman would break. She did it 3 weeks later, at a smaller gathering at Lady Marbury's own house, chosen deliberately. because Eleanor could hardly avoid a hostess who was also her client, remarking, in a carrying voice, to a circle that included two of Eleanor's own customers, that she had always found it curious how certain persons in trade managed such very rapid rises in capital, and that she herself would never dream of extending her custom to a house whose bookkeeping, she understood, had once been the subject of some question at the Guildhall. It was a lie invented on the spot, and it was calculated with real precision. A whisper of fraud was the one rumor that could unravel 41 employees' livelihoods faster than any accusation of birth or scandal ever could. Eleanor Bray heard of it within the hour from Lady Marbury herself, white with fury on her behalf. She did not answer it that night. She went home to Bray & Company at 1 in the morning and sat at her own desk under the lamp with the ledger open in front of her, the true one, the one that recorded, in her own clear hand, 4 years of every transaction the house had ever made, and worked until dawn, not out of panic but because she had learned, in 4 years of building something from nothing, that the only answer to a lie about numbers was the numbers themselves, produced faster and more completely than anyone expected a woman to produce them. Julian Ashworth came to Bray & Company himself, uninvited, on the following Tuesday. He had heard what his mother had done, heard it from Sir Godfrey Aldous, delivered with unmistakable coldness, in the manner of a man informing a friend that his family had disgraced itself. And he arrived at the warehouse in Cheapside in his own carriage, in full daylight, which was in itself a kind of announcement, since dukes did not customarily call at counting houses, and everyone on the street understood exactly what they were watching. Eleanor received him standing behind her own desk, and did not ask him to sit. "My mother's remark was a lie," he said, without preamble. "I have come to say so, and to say it will be retracted, publicly, in whatever manner you require." How generous! Her voice was even. "You will forgive me, Your Grace, if I do not fall to my knees in gratitude. I have some little experience of your family's generosity." That landed, and he let it land, and did not flinch from it, which she had not expected. "I deserve that," he said. "I have deserved a great deal more of it than you have troubled to give me. I invited you to my mother's ball to watch you be grateful, Miss Bray. I am not proud of it. I am considerably less proud of it having spent 3 weeks watching a room be grateful to you instead, and having understood, rather too slowly, what that meant about the 4 years in between. You are apologizing very thoroughly for a man who has not yet been forgiven. I am aware I have not earned it." "Then stop apologizing," Eleanor said, sharper than she intended, "and start being useful. Your mother's remark has cost me 2 accounts already this week, and an apology does not pay a clerk's wages. I do not require your contrition, Your Grace. I require you to fix precisely what your family broke. And then we may discuss whatever you imagine you owe me beyond that." Eleanor set down her pen. "What does it mean, Your Grace, that I did not release a frightened girl from an unsuitable match, which is the version I have told myself for 4 years? I abandoned a woman of remarkable capacity. At the one moment she might have reasonably expected support, because my mother judged her connections insufficiently grand, and I let my mother judge it, because it was easier than doing the judging myself." His jaw worked once. "You built this out of £200 you never cashed. I have seen the torn draft. Sir Godfrey told me you kept it." "I kept it," Eleanor said, "to remind myself precisely what I was worth to your family. It has been an excellent piece of bookkeeping." He absorbed that the way a man absorbs a blow he has walked toward deliberately, and something in his face, the practiced smoothness of a man who had never once, in 34 years, been required to feel the full weight of a consequence, came apart, just slightly, in a way she had not thought him capable of. I do not ask you to forgive it, he said. I am not able to imagine what that would look like, or why you would grant it. I am asking you to let me correct what my mother did publicly, because 41 people's wages should not suffer for her spite, whatever you decide about the rest of it. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Very well, she said. Retract it at Lady Marbury's this Thursday, in the same room it was spoken in. You will say precisely what you have said to me, that it was untrue, and that you know it to be untrue, because you have examined the accounts of Bray and Company yourself and found them exemplary. You will need to have actually examined them, Your Grace, because half that room will ask you a question about them within the week, and if you cannot answer it, the retraction becomes worse than the lie. I have never examined an account in my life. Then Thursday gives you 3 days to learn, said Eleanor Bray, and sat back down, and returned to her ledger, and did not offer him a chair or a further word, and he understood himself to be dismissed, and went. He spent those 3 days at her own counting house, at her own insistence, and under her own instruction, because she had decided, somewhere in the hour after he left, that if he wished to be useful, he could make himself useful properly, rather than performing usefulness for a drawing-room. He sat at a clerk's desk from 8 in the morning until dark, learning to read a ledger the way she had taught herself to read one at 19, out of necessity, in a rented room, with no one to teach her. It was during those 3 days, in close and unglamorous proximity, that something neither of them had planned for began, slowly, to happen. You do not delegate anything, he said, on the second afternoon, watching her check a column of figures a clerk had already checked. I delegate a great deal. I do not delegate the things I cannot afford to be wrong about. She did not look up. You delegated your own engagement to your mother, Your Grace. I have some opinions about the practice. I am aware. You have shared several. But he said it without heat, and there was, for the first time, something almost like a smile at the corner of his mouth, and she caught it, and did not entirely suppress her own. On the second morning, before the clerks arrived, she took him down into the warehouse itself, among the bolts of silk stacked to the rafters, because she had decided he could not properly understand a ledger without understanding what the figures in it actually were. This, she said, unrolling a length of the bronze-gold shot silk she had worn to his ball, took 11 weeks from the lion looms to this floor, and I paid for it before I had a single order to cover the cost, because I had learned by then that the house which waits for certainty never gets the good weavers. Your mother would call that reckless. My mother calls anything she does not control reckless. He ran his thumb along the selvage, careful, the way a man handles something he suspects he has no right to touch. It is extraordinary. It is silk, Your Grace. I sell a great deal of it. I do not mean the silk. He looked at her directly, and there was nothing performed in it. I have stood in ballrooms my entire life, surrounded by beautiful things I did nothing to earn. I do not think I understood, until this week, what it costs to earn one. Eleanor said nothing for a moment, folding the silk back along its original crease with the unconscious precision of 11 years' habit. When I first came to London, she said, I slept in the room above what was then a single rented counter, and I ate bread and dripping for the better part of a year, and I told myself every single night that I would rather starve honestly than accept another shilling of your family's notion of what I was owed. I am not telling you this so you will admire me for it. I am telling you because you asked what a thing costs, and I do not think anyone in your life has ever once given you an honest answer. No, Julian said quietly. They have not. They stood among the silk a long moment, close enough that the space between them had narrowed without either one choosing it, and for once neither of them reached for a ledger or an excuse. On the third evening, with the clerks gone, and the lamp burning low, and the ledgers finally reconciled, he said, into the quiet, "I used to think you plain, 4 years ago. My mother said so, and I let myself believe it, because it made the leaving easier. And now? Now I think I was a coward who could not see past what he was told to see. And I have spent 3 days in a counting house, discovering that the woman I let my mother describe to me built this." He gestured at the ledgers, the warehouse, the whole quiet weight of it, out of £200 and 4 years and, I begin to suspect, considerably more courage than I have ever once been required to show. He was very close to her now, across the narrow desk, close enough that neither of them moved away from it. "I do not think you plain, Eleanor. I think I was blind, which is a different fault and a worse one." The lamp guttered. Neither of them closed the last 18 inches between them, though both were entirely aware of exactly where the other's hands rested on the desk, and the not closing of it was its own kind of unbearable. He reached across the ledger and, very slowly, as though giving her every opportunity to stop him, brushed a stray thread of copper silk from her sleeve, a small, unnecessary gesture. The kind a man invents when he wants an excuse to close a distance he has no other right to close. His fingers grazed the inside of her wrist for perhaps 2 seconds. Neither of them moved away from it. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice had gone rough in a way 4 years of drawing rooms had never once produced from him. Whatever he meant to say next did not arrive, because the night watchman's bell sounded in the yard below, marking the hour, sharp and ordinary and entirely unwelcome, and the moment tore itself open before either of them could decide what they would have done with it. Eleanor stepped back first and drew a breath that was not quite steady. "You should go," she said, low. "It is very late, and Thursday requires you sharp." "I know it." He did not move for another 3 seconds. Then he stepped back and bowed, correctly, and went out into the dark, and she sat at her desk a long while after, doing no work at all. Thursday came, and with it the second and final move of the Dowager Duchess. She had not been idle in the 3 days her son spent at a merchant's counting house. She had gone, herself, to a magistrate of her acquaintance, a man who owed the Cavendish family a long-standing favour regarding a nephew's gaming debts, and laid before him a complaint, hastily and improperly assembled, alleging that Bray and Company's royal warrant application contained falsified figures of turnover, and requesting that the warrant be suspended pending investigation. It was not merely a whisper this time. It was paper, filed with the Board of Trade, timed to land on the Wednesday evening, the night before the retraction, so that whatever Julian said at Lady Marbury's would arrive already undercut by an official cloud of suspicion. Eleanor received the notice of suspension at 9 on Thursday morning, 4 hours before she and Julian were to appear together in Lady Marbury's drawing room. She did not weep, though the narrator will note that she wanted to, badly, for the first time in 4 years, because a suspended warrant was not merely an insult now, it was a genuine and immediate threat to 41 wages and everything she had built since a torn banker's draft. She sat alone in the counting house for the better part of an hour before she sent for anyone, doing the thing she had trained herself to do since 19, totaling exactly what the suspension would cost, to the shilling, so that whatever grief she allowed herself would have a number attached to it, and could therefore be managed like any other loss. It came to a great deal. 2 of the 41 clerks had children she knew by name. She wrote both figures down and put the paper in the drawer with the torn draft, because she had learned that what frightened her needed a place to live that was not directly behind her eyes. She sent for Julian at 10. He arrived within the half hour. and read the notice standing in her counting house with a stillness that frightened his own coachman, waiting outside, who had never once seen his master go so quiet. "This is my mother's hand," he said. I recognize the phrasing before I recognize the seal. I cannot prove that. You do not need to. I can. He set the notice down with exaggerated care, as a man sets down something he would otherwise throw. "Eleanor, I am going to ask you to trust me with something I have never once, in my adult life, actually done, which is to choose you over my own mother in a room full of witnesses, publicly, irreversibly, at whatever cost to my own standing that requires. I am asking because I do not believe I have earned the right to ask it. I am asking anyway." "Then do it," said Eleanor Bray, "and stop asking my permission to be decent. I have had 4 years of men asking my permission to do the correct thing eventually. Go and do it now." Lady Marbury's drawing room that Thursday held perhaps 60 people, a good many of them the same faces from the Cavendish ball, and the Dowager Duchess was present, seated with visible satisfaction near the fire, having heard already, from her magistrate friend, that the warrant suspension notice would by now have reached Cheapside. Julian Ashworth walked to the centre of that room and did not wait to be given the floor. 3 weeks ago, in this house, my mother suggested that Bray and Company's books had been questioned at the Guildhall, he said. That was a fabrication, and I said so privately to Miss Bray, and I promised to say so publicly today. I intend to keep that promise. But I have also this morning received evidence. He held up the notice, and beside it, a second paper, which he had ridden to the Board of Trade himself, before 9, to obtain, using his own name and rank to demand an immediate audience, that a complaint was filed yesterday against the same warrant application, in terms that match my mother's private remarks so precisely that the clerk who received it was able to describe her to me by sight. There was a sound in that room that 60 people had not expected to make together. Lady Marbury, standing nearest the fire, set down her cup with a small, distinct click that carried further than she likely intended. Sir Godfrey Aldous, at the back, said something short and approving under his breath that 2 of his neighbours later repeated as "Good God, he's actually done it." A clergyman's wife near the window, who had known the Dowager Duchess for 30 years and feared her for most of them, found herself, for the first time in 3 decades of acquaintance, entirely unable to meet the older woman's eye. "I have withdrawn the complaint this morning, under my own authority as a peer and as her landlord of record for the Cheapside premises, which gives me standing the clerk was very willing to acknowledge." He turned and looked directly at his mother for the first time. "I do not say this to punish you, madam, though I understand it will. I say it because I spent 4 years believing you had protected me from an unsuitable match, and I have spent 3 weeks discovering that what you actually did was protect me from ever having to become a man capable of recognizing worth when it was standing directly in front of me. I am done being protected from that." Julian, the Dowager Duchess, found her voice at last, thin and furious. "You will ruin us both over a shopkeeper." "She is not a shopkeeper, madam. She is the proprietor of a house of business worth considerably more than my own unmortgaged income, and she built the whole of it, without a single farthing of the family fortune you have spent 30 years protecting from people you deemed unworthy of it. I begin to wonder what exactly it was you thought you were protecting, if not simply your own comfort." His voice did not rise. "You will retract your complaint to the board yourself, in writing, by tomorrow, or I will make public precisely how it came to be filed, and you may decide for yourself which humiliation you would rather manage." The Dowager Duchess did not speak again. She had gone the colour of old paper, and Lady Marbury, to her eternal credit, simply rang for tea. which is what a good hostess does when there is nothing else left to be done in a room. Eleanor Bray, standing near the window, found that the whole room had turned to look at her, and that for once in her life she did not know what her own face was doing. Julian crossed to her. "I have chosen," he said, quietly enough that it was nearly private, though everyone in that room could see it plainly. "Publicly, and I hope irreversibly, though that part is entirely yours to decide. I love you, Eleanor. I loved the girl in Hartford, though I was too great a coward to say so when it would have cost me nothing. I love the woman who built 41 livelihoods out of a torn draft considerably more, because I have watched what it cost her, and I would like very much to spend whatever time you will permit me learning to be worth what I nearly threw away." "You threw it away entirely, Your Grace," Eleanor said. "There was no nearly about it." "No," he agreed. "There was not." She looked at him for a long moment, in front of 60 witnesses and a stricken duchess and a room gone very quiet, and then she reached into the small reticule at her wrist and drew out 2 torn halves of a banker's draft, worn soft at the fold from 4 years of carrying. "I kept this," she said, "to remember what I was worth to you. I find I would like to stop needing the reminder." She held the pieces out to him. He took them, and their fingers touched properly for the first time in 4 years, and he understood exactly what was being handed to him, and did not trust himself to speak for a moment. The warrant was reinstated within the week, on the direct intervention of the board's president, who had, as it happened, been extending his own wife's custom to Bray & Company for years, and had no patience whatsoever for a suspension he privately termed a disgrace to the department. The Dowager Duchess retired to the Dower House at Cavendish's Hampshire seat by the end of July, and remained there, by mutual and largely unspoken agreement, for the rest of her life. They married in September, quietly, at the small church in Hartford, where Eleanor's father had once preached. He had died 2 years before, and never seen any of it, which was the one part of the whole story that never stopped aching her. And Julian wore, at her particular request, a coat of Bray & Company's own bronze gold silk beneath his wedding blacks, where no one but the 2 of them would ever know it was there. By the following winter, Bray & Company held the royal warrant outright, framed above the counting-house desk, and Eleanor had not given up the business. Nor did Julian ever once suggest she should. Sir Godfrey Aldous, who had greeted her at the door of Cavendish House the night this whole story began, became godfather to their first child the following autumn, and remarked at the christening that he had known, the moment he saw the 2 of them fail entirely to acknowledge one another across a crowded ballroom, that something considerable was underway. Julian learned, over that first year of marriage, to read a ledger competently enough to be genuinely useful to her on the days she wanted the help, and to stay entirely out of the way on the days she did not, which she told anyone who asked was the single most romantic accomplishment of his entire life. On a cold, bright morning, the following January, the Duchess of Cavendish stood in her own counting-house going over the New Year accounts, and her husband came in with their infant daughter on his shoulder and a look on his face she had come, in 4 months of marriage, to recognize as the specific expression of a man still faintly disbelieving of his own good fortune. "The torn draft," he said. "You never did tell me what became of the pieces." Eleanor reached into the desk drawer and drew out a small frame, glazed, the 2 torn halves mounted side by side beneath the glass, and set it where the morning light caught it. "I had it framed," she said, "the week after the wedding. Not to remember what I was worth to you. To remember what I built while you were still deciding." He looked at it a long moment, and then at her, and said nothing at all, because there was for once nothing he needed to add.